Thank you so much. My name is Dr. Tauqeer. I live in California. I just wanted to throw some light on Tipu Sultan's rockets and the supporting technologies. A solid propellant rocket is a system. It requires a host of technologies and a large number of subsystems. Advanced technologies such as rockets require a support system of qualified experts, a functional structure, cutting edge technologies, and political will to adopt and deploy them. Tipu Sultan's achievement was to create an advanced technological ecosystem in the Kingdom of Mysore, which was a match for any in Europe or America, and in some respects was even more advanced. We highlight some of the more salient aspects of this technological ecosystem here. Let us begin with metallurgy and ore extraction. Iron ore was found in the riverbeds and rocks in several places in South India. Indeed, the wood's steel was known in the old world for its toughness. The superplastic structure of South Indian swords gave them unmatched resilience, strength, and toughness. The ore was smelted in furnaces with specialized processes to produce fine grain iron cylinders. The fine grain was essential for machining in bow mills, which were set up in Mysore-Bangalore corridor for the manufacture of rocket cylinders. The iron cylinders, closed at one end and open with an orifice at the other, were tied to long bamboo poles, which provided stability to the rockets in their flight. Bamboo being a strong tubular composite fibrous material with a high tensile, compression, and flexural strength, ideal for engineering applications where strength combined with toughness were the requirements. The solid propellant used for the rocket was gunpowder, which was a mixture of potassium nitrate, sulfur, and charcoal. Gunpowder is an exothermic high energy material, meaning it gives off energy when it burns. The effectiveness of this high energy material as a propellant depends on its chemical composition, size and shape of the particles, pack density, moisture control through additives, and the proportions of its constituents. The preparation of high energy materials is done only in military arsenals. Civilians should not attempt to handle them. In modern day applications, small quantities of high energy materials are used in automobile airbags, emergency door openers in commercial aircraft, and in pilot ejection systems in fighter aircraft. Solid propellant rockets are also used by modern militaries as well as the launch of satellites into space. The Mysore engineers achieved a high degree of standardization in the materials, processes, manufacture, assembly, testing, and deployment of rockets. They were far ahead of their counterparts in Europe, America, and other parts of Asia at that time. Tipu Sultan established research and development centers for rockets. Rockets of various sizes were produced. In these arsenals, some were designed for linear motion, others were made for serpentine motion once they hit the ground. The largest rockets would traverse a range of 1.5 miles and carried a payload of sharp swords. In this sense, the rockets were the first missiles used by any military in the world. The production of rockets, along with the casting of cannons and gun barrels, made Mysore a manufacturing hub for military hardware. The engineers were trained in calculations of missile dynamics and their trajectories. For each category of rocket, they knew the output power and could determine its range from the angle of its launch and prevailing atmospheric resistance. The basic unit for Tipu Sultan's army was a Kashoon. There were more than 27 Kashoons in the army. Each Kashoon had a rocket corps attached to it. When Tipu Sultan was retired in the Fourth Anglo-Mysore War in 1799, there were 5,000 rocket men attached to his ground troops, and each rocket man had several rockets assigned to him. The rockets were highly mobile, unlike the heavy military pieces, and could be easily carried through mountain passes and steep hills. Military technology can be sustained only within the matrix of a sound economy. As you will hear from some of the scholars during this series, Tipu Sultan paid attention to agriculture, livestock, and horse breeding. He imported cultivation of silk from China and introduced new and sturdier brands of rice. He rationalized the tax collection system and encouraged exports. Mysore became a hub for garment manufacturing and sandalwood production. Mysore products were sold in places like Sindh, Muscat, and Jeddah. The standard of living in Mysore was much higher and that in England then compared to that in England, France, or any other country in continental Europe. In the early part of the 18th century, Bengal was the industrial hub of the subcontinent. Eventually, the Maratha raided Bengal in the 1740s and demolished much of its industry. As many as 400,000 Bengalis perished in these raids, and the Bengal economy was in ruins. A weakened Bengal fell to the East India Company at the Battle of Plassey in 1757. Subsequently, towards the end of the 18th century, it was Tipu Sultan's Mysore that became the manufacturing and industrial hub for South Asia, far surpassing all other regions, both in military and civilian technologies. It was not British arms or technology that defeated him. It was British diplomacy and plots. In the Third Anglo-Mysore War of 1789 to 92, Tipu Sultan had effectively bottled up Lord Cornwallis just as George Washington had him cornered at the Battle of York in 1781. It was the simultaneous invasion by neighboring rulers plus combined British attacks from the north and the east that overcame the Mysore armies. He was martyred in 1799 in the Fourth Anglo-Mysore War while defending his capital against a combined onslaught of the British and the nearby rulers. Tipu Sultan is remembered in military history as the inventor of solid propellant rockets and his use as missiles. His rockets, modified in London, were used in the Anglo-American War of 1812 and inspired the composition of the American national anthem. He was the only one who defeated the British Empire in open combat on Indian soil at the Battle of Polydor in 1780. Among the monarchs of Asia, he foresaw the threat of expanding European imperialism and spent a lifetime in combat against it. He was a rational man and was at home with the Age of Enlightenment. After the French Revolution, he declared himself Citizen Tipu in a Mysorean republic. He was a man of faith and reason, and one who believed in science and technology and took his kingdom into the forefront of technological prowess. His kingdom was a meritocracy, and he appointed the best available men to high positions based on merit rather than religion and caste. He himself was a Muslim, but his chief minister was a Brahmin named Punnaya. His finance minister was Krishna Rao, his minister for police was Ranga Iyengar, and his delegates to the Delhi Mughal court were Mool Chand and Sujan Rai. He honored other religions and gave large donations to temples and restored the venerated temple of Sringeri after the attack from the Marathas. An impeccable foe of imperialism, he was firm with his enemies, for which he was vilified by tissue bashers. The greatest tribute that a monarch can earn is the respect of his adversaries. Tipu was held in high esteem by his foes, the British, his comrades, the French, and the American revolutionaries who were engaged in a struggle for their independence in faraway lands. Tipu was indeed a sultan of sultans. How unfortunate for India that he is unfairly vilified by communal forces in India and is venerated in places like London, Paris, and Washington. Thank you so much.
Hi all, this is Ameen Ahmed from Canada. The title of my presentation is Tipu Sultan's Foreign Diplomacy through the Letters of Thomas Jefferson. Tipu Sultan was a modern king with a truly international outlook. While his father Hyder Ali recruited European soldiers and even received fighting men from nations like Persia. Tipu went a step ahead. Not only did he continue his military contacts with the Europeans, chiefly the French, he also sent his emissaries on foreign trade and diplomatic missions to Europe and Arabian Peninsula. Aware of the global reach of British, his arch enemy, he relentlessly sought to establish global alliances with political and military powers outside India. The fact that Tipu sent ambassadors to other parts of South Asia, West Asia, and also Europe is fairly well known to students of modern history. But let's explore an interesting phase of global diplomacy when a founding father of America recorded Tipu Sultan's foreign missions in his official correspondence. Let's look at the relations between Tipu and foreign powers. Now, born and raised at a time when European powers were in a race to colonize Indian subcontinent, Tipu had to wade through a minefield of foreign relations to try and save his kingship. Tipu learned of his father Hyder Ali's death in December 1782 and was preparing to take over the reign of Mysore Kingdom amidst a war with the British, in which the French were his principal ally. At the same time, Americans, also supported by the French, were fighting for their own independence from the British. Now, American revolutionaries not only took inspiration from Mysore Kingdom, from the battles that Mysore Kingdom was waging against the British under Hyder Ali, but also celebrated his many victories, including the battles against, the battle win that Tipu Sultan gained over the British at Polilore, during which he's said to have used his rockets, and hundreds and hundreds of European and British Indian soldiers died, and many of them were captured. Now, by what happened was in 1783, the English and the French, they signed a peace treaty in September that year, and they agreed not only to cease hostilities against each other, but they also agreed to stop supporting each other's allies that were in conflict in the Indian subcontinent. The fact that France signed the treaty without consulting Tipu, its ally in India, upset him. So what Tipu did was he looked to form alliances with other international powers that could help him permanently uproot the British from South Asia. Now let's look at Tipu's international diplomacy. Tipu sent a large number of diplomats to Constantinople, the capital of Ottoman Empire, in 1785. He instructed these diplomats to then travel to Paris to meet French King Louis XVI, and onward to London to meet the King of England before returning back to Srirangapatna, his capital. Now, he wanted his diplomats to meet these two kings to convince them not to support the Marathas and Nizam in his conflict with them. But Tipu recalled the diplomats from Constantinople and instead sent a separate embassy to France in 1787. And until recently, historians believed one of Tipu's objectives in sending his embassy to Constantinople was to have himself recognized as a sovereign by the Ottomans. However, Iqbal Hussain presented a paper relating to this embassy at the Indian History Congress in 2001, in which he argued that Tipu treated himself at par with the monarchs of Ottoman Empire, France and England. And nowhere in his communication directed to these kings, particularly to the Ottoman king, did he address himself as someone who was of a lesser stature. So, in effect, uh, there's this new theory that says that Tipu treated himself a king like anyone else, and he didn't look for a recognition from any other king uh, for him to be treated at par. Let's look at Tipu's French embassy and how Thomas Jefferson saw that embassy. Thomas Jefferson is a founding father of America, and he's the principal author of the Declaration of Independence. Now he was also its third president. After America formally gained independence from British in 1784, he was the country's ambassador to France. Now, a nascent America was keen to develop commerce with East Indies, India, and its neighboring region, as it was known then. So it is no surprise that America's founding fathers followed the affairs of Indian rulers, particularly Tipu Sultan, both within Indian subcontinent as well as in Europe. In his official correspondence from Paris, Jefferson provided and received regular updates on the reception of Tipu's ambassadors at the French court. The peace treaty signed at Versailles, France, in September 1783, did not diminish the French mistrust of the British, as can be seen from Jefferson's letter to Monsieur on 17 May 1788. He expressed fears that European powers would fight for supremacy in Western Europe. Then he listed steps that were taken in this direction by various countries, including France. Now, France had sent 3 regiments to India along with officers to help Tipu. In the same letter, as well as another letter that he wrote to John Jay on 23rd May 1788, he wrote how France was expecting Tipu's embassy. Then in his letter to Thomas Jefferson, dated 11 June 1788, Stephen Catherine Jr. wrote from Marseille about the arrival of Tipu's ambassadors at Toulon. People at Marseille expected to see these guests on their way to Paris, and that a noble reception as well as festivals were prepared for them. Jefferson, in his letter to André Limousin, dated 18 June 1788, confirmed the arrival of Tipu's ambassador in Toulon on 10 June the same year, and that they were accorded, to quote, a magnificent reception. In another letter to Robert Montgomery, written on the same day, he reconfirmed news of arrival of Tipu's embassy. Now, he continued then to add updates on the upheaval that happened around France in the run-up to the French Revolution. Now, he wrote to John Rutledge on 13 July the same year about the continued internal chaos in France, as well as the wait for Tipu Sultan's ambassadors by the French. And on 3rd August, he wrote to John Jay again about the continued internal chaos in France, and he added that Tipu Sultan's ambassadors had arrived in Paris, and to quote him, he wrote, "in pomp and ceremony," but he also added that he was unaware about the purpose of their visit. Then he noted the beginning of a military conflict between Russia and Sweden, the later being supported by England and paid for by Turkey. Now, naval battles between Turkey and Russia also took place, according to him. But the context of this conflict with Tipu's ambassadors in Europe is interesting, because the conflict between Turks and Russians and the support the Turks received from England could have been an important reason for Tipu's embassy to Turkey failing to strike a military alliance, which Tipu had requested the Ottomans. Now, Jefferson wrote to Mary Barclay on Friday, 8th August, the same year, 1788, about the reception of Tipu Sultan's ambassadors at Versailles that Sunday, which he intended to attend. He wrote to Monsieur on 9 August 1788 that Tipu's ambassadors were to be received at Versailles the next day. Again, to quote him, he wrote, "in great pomp." The next day, he wrote to John Jay that Tipu's ambassadors were received with unusual pomp by the French king amidst numerous people. He added that from what he could hear, only mutual assurances of goodwill were exchanged and nothing more. Now, what happened after this mission? After this embassy that was sent to France and earlier to Constantinople. Now, Tipu's mission to France failed, as did his embassy to Turkey. The one factor being that the country, France was in the throes of a revolution that would ultimately throw the king. And on the same time, as we discussed, Ottoman's conflict with Russia continued and its alliance with the British remained in place. So these circumstances may have played a role in in Tipu failing to get support for his for military alliances with either of the international powers. And this was just before the onset of the Third Anglo-Mysore War in 1790. Tipu suffered a huge setback in this war, which ended with him having to cede half of his richest domains to the British and its chief allies, the Nizam of Hyderabad and the Marathas. Now, till he paid the crippling war indemnity, two of his sons were held ransom by the British, but he was not to be subdued. He invited Napoleon Bonaparte and Shah Zaman of Afghanistan to join hands with him to eliminate the British. He was perhaps the last of kings in Indian subcontinent to fiercely pursue a foreign policy independent of British, and a fact which was acknowledged by global powers of that day and age, including the newly formed United States of America and its founding fathers. Thank you.